Hi guys! Welcome to your next class in topic 4. Today we're going to talk about access to fresh water. So we're going to go over a little bit some of the uses for water and some of the problems that arise when a growing world population is trying to access fresh, clean drinking water all the time. So let's get started. First of all, I want you to think just for a minute about how many different uses you have for water in a given day. Water is a critical resource. You use it to drink, you use it to shower, you use it to wash your hands, you use it to grow your food, you use it to grow the fibers that are made to grow your clothing, you use it to mix with other things so that you can have cocktails. You guys probably don't have cocktails, you're in high school. But you get the idea. There's a million different things that you can do with water. So literally every cell in your body is 70% water, and it's vital that we manage this supply of fresh water correctly so that we don't run out of resources. When we look at the sustainability of freshwater resource use, so in sustainability, we're talking about full natural replacement and full recovery of ecosystems affected by extraction. That's a vocabulary word way back from topic 1. There's basically only a few places that usable freshwater comes from. The first is surface freshwater, so reservoirs, lakes, rivers, and streams. And the second is aquifers, and those are underground storages of water. They can be fossilized, which means they are no longer available for use. Their recharging system has been cut off. And they can be recharging, which means that they are still filled up, but in order for the use to be sustainable, you need to extract water at the same rate at which it is entering the aquifer. And we have a problem doing that, generally. When we look at global consumption of water is increasing dramatically. And that's basically due to our capitalist lifestyle. All of the stuff that people want to buy takes a tremendous amount of water to produce. From electronic goods to buying clothes all the time to plastics. All of those things need a lot of water in their production. We also just have more people, and the food that they eat and the fluids that they need to keep them alive demand a significant amount of water. And that increased use leads to two things. It leads to degradation of water, which basically means that the quality of water going around is not as good because it's being cycled through again and again and again more quickly than we're used to. And it also leads, more troublingly, to water scarcity. And that means that availability of water is not very good. Not even that it's bad quality, but that we just don't have enough water to begin with. So let's look a little bit at how we can try to increase our fresh water supplies. Because I really can't state enough the importance of this as an environmental problem in your lifetime. This is something that your generation is going to be faced with in a very real way. And so there are 4 main strategies that people look at now to try to increase freshwater supplies. The first, and this is like a super popular idea right now, is desalination. So taking salt water and ionizing out the salt in order to make it drinkable. You see this in Middle Eastern countries. You're seeing this even on the coast of California now. And this is effective, but the current technology is very expensive. So if you were asked to evaluate that process, there is a benefit and a drawback for you. Rainwater harvesting is another much less expensive method of increasing freshwater supplies. This is used a lot in island nations where they don't have access to so much technology or so much money. And it does do the trick of providing the resource, but it's dependent on rainwater. And like we saw in the last class, rainwater can be a little bit fickle because weather patterns can change. And with climate change, weather patterns are changing more dramatically all the time. So your evaluation points for rainwater are there, your benefit and your drawback. The next is a process called gray water recycling. And so gray water is water that has been sort of gently used in irrigation or household use, and it does provide more resources, but the resources are of a little bit lower quality. They have to be filtered pretty carefully in order to be used for consumption. This was actually a process that Australia tried to use in the 1990s when they were facing a really serious drought. And the population of Australia was really resistant to using this gray water. They thought it was somehow dirty and they didn't want to have to consume it. So culturally, that's an important sort of optic to keep in mind in gray water recycling. The last is improved irrigation, and this is a very technocentric idea. Improved irrigation is dependent on technology, and it can slow down the consumption of water if we make like smart pads that only water plants that need it, but it doesn't stop the consumption. As we need to create more and more food for our world population, it is going to be really important to consider irrigation and the water needs of the crops that we're producing. So these 4 strategies all have a little bit of an evaluation with them here, and these are things that are going to be considered again and again as serious problems from all different environmental viewpoints, and it's important to have an idea of how you want to consider them. So it might be worth pausing the video and taking a minute to look at these and thinking about which one you agree with the most. What's our best hope of increasing freshwater supplies? When you're done, move on to the next slide, and we are going to talk a little bit about a case study of what you could call a water war, the sharing of freshwater resources over international boundaries. And this is another thing that is going to become an increasingly big deal in years to come. Some people, myself included, would argue that a lot of the civil unrest that has happened in the Middle East in the last 30 years or so has been started because of unavailability of basic resources like water. The Syrian conflict started with a few years of bad drought. And once a country of people gets the idea that their government isn't able to provide for them, they're much more likely to uprise in civil disobedience. And so this question of water availability is becoming increasingly important. And when you need to share water over international boundaries, that's a really complicated diplomacy issue. So it's important to look at some case studies of how this happens. The case study that we are going to look at is Israel and Jordan. So Israel is obviously in a pretty delicate political situation with Palestine. They share one border with Palestine. They share another border on the other side with Jordan. So these 2 countries share a border, and the region is constantly in serious drought. All of the countries in this part of the Middle East are really concerned about water resources in years to come. They are building desalination plants. They're trying hard to ration water throughout their populations. They're trying to figure out smart irrigation techniques. This is a constant thought in the Middle East, is where water is going to come from. But despite these drought conditions, Israel gives water to Jordan in hopes that Jordan will support them in the political conflicts that are taking place between Israel and Palestine. And that's not something they say outright, but it's sort of like in that larger picture of diplomacy, water becomes a really good bargaining chip. And you're going to see that more and more in international relations as water availability becomes more of a problem. So I think that it's interesting to keep in mind how different countries relate to each other about their water use. For now, let's move on to your homework assignment. If you're following along in the textbook, you should read pages 207 to 213. And if you are not following along in the textbook, you should definitely work on this comprehension question. This is another long response, paper 2, part B, section C. So a 9-point question for which you should develop an essay. And the prompt that you need to address is evaluate which environmental value system is most important in addressing the problem of water supply. So there are a lot of different directions you could take this writing. Remember to be using concise and succinct course vocabulary and providing specific examples of whatever element of this problem that you are talking about whenever possible. So make an attempt at writing out an essay response to this question, and when you are ready, move to the next class and we will review some of the possible answers. See you there.